We are getting closer and closer to Game 1 of the NBL Championship Series. It all starts on Friday, and now it's time to drill down a little bit further, get into some of the X's and O's and work out who is going to win this thing and why. Who better to talk to, of course, than one of the best basketball brains in Australia, and a man who has spent a long time scouting both the Sydney Kings and the New Zealand Breakers. Simon Mitchell, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jack.
I want to start by talking about Game 1. Before we get super technical, just from a momentum standpoint, from a confidence standpoint, how big is Game 1 in this series?
Oh, it's huge. Especially for the home team. If you take care of yours on the road at home, then you can go into confidence with Game 2. But if you lose yours, now all of a sudden the pressure's on. So with a little bit of a layoff, with a FIBA break, it'll be really interesting to see how this one pans out.
So, yeah, that's the other fascinating bit about this build-up for a championship series that we haven't had to encounter before is the break. Has it suited one team more than the other? Does it matter? How would you look at this from a coaching lens?
Yeah, look, anyone who's got a few niggles will welcome the break to try and freshen up the bodies. But we hear some rumblings out of New Zealand with Barry Brown carrying an injury. But if it's as severe as what I've heard, with a break in the hand, I don't think the 10 days is really going to matter too much. But I think anyone who's carried a little injury, I think Cooks may have had a bit of an ankle. This will be a good period for him to rest up.
So we've got the number one scoring team in the competition, Sydney, who are putting on best part of 95 points a game against New Zealand, who are the best at the competition in denying teams what they want at the offensive end. What's more important going into this series? Because there's a style of play for the regular season, and then there seems to be a style of play come playoffs time.
Yeah, traditionally the playoffs, it starts to lock up a little bit. I think a lot of that depends on how it's officiated. If it's officiated close, then we could still see that ball get up and down the floor a little bit. But if they let them get into a bit of an arm wrestle, then we can see those scores come down. Now, during the course of this year with these two teams playing each other, we've seen relatively low scores as it is. So, it'll be interesting to see how that one pans out. Sydney, if they can get the ball on their terms and turn it into a bit of a track meet, there's going to be a tough series for New Zealand.
What have we learned from the 3 games so far? I know you've gone back and had a good look at them. Anything that stands out from your point of view?
I think the couple of things. The first thing that stands out for me is just New Zealand being able to play it on their terms. The scores have been low. I think they've kept Sydney to about 85, 86 points a game. And they've kept them about 4 or 5 points less in transition per game than what they have been during the course of the year on a regular basis, Sydney, that is. And if you can keep Sydney out of the open court, then, a lot of the riddle's been solved. Having said that, Sydney's won the series 2-1, but they've all been tight games, and we haven't seen them at their full peak too, with both teams with healthy rosters. So I look forward to seeing that in this series.
So pace is a big thing in your mind. What pace this series has played at?
Yeah, for sure. If it's a high possession game, and Sydney can create that, then I feel like that. That doesn't work. New Zealand want to use the clock. They want to execute in their half court, get into their pick and rolls, use the post. But if that ball's flying up and down the floor, that it just doesn't fit them.
So while we're on the theme of transition and the way that Sydney like to play, Xavier Cooks is a unique beast. We know that he's the MVP of this competition. Not many guys that size can play a point forward role and bring the ball up the floor and either play make for himself or for others. So do you have to go up and meet him as opposed to letting him get beyond halfway?
Yeah, it's a tough one because he plays so many roles in transition. Like he can be the primary ball handler, and that creates mismatches. There's not too many 4 men who have the athleticism and speed to stay in front of him. And even when he switches to the 5 with their small ball lineup, now it's even bigger of a curse for the defense. So what New Zealand must do whenever he's handling the ball in the open court or being the primary ball handler is make sure there's a wall of New Zealand jerseys in front of him. If he sees daylight or there's space there, then he's just going to be ultra aggressive and start playmaking early in the offense. And that's what Sydney love to do. So, yeah, really key, really key.
Who suits him more? Is it a Jarrell Brantley matchup? Is it a Tom Abercrombie matchup? Is it a combination of both?
Yeah, look, I think the one thing New Zealand do have is a lot of versatility in the defense. So Brantley is certainly one of those athletes who can stay in front of the ball. Abercrombie, without a doubt, and they'll switch him on there into the ball screen. So a lot of the time when Cooks is coming down the floor, they'll set little rub screens from the other guards. And if Abercrombie's on that, then they'll automatically switch. Whereas if it's other guards, and there may be a bit of a show and they try and keep their matchups. But Abercrombie's comfortable playing that role. But the thing I like about Abercrombie, if we saw at the back end of the game last time they played, was his ability to stifle DJ Vasiljevic. So it's really a little bit of like, okay, pick your poison right there. So I feel like Abercrombie will probably stay primarily on the backcourt, and they'll go with the bigger guys with Cooks.
They shoot it at 36% from outside Sydney across the season. That's got them number 2 in the competition. You look at some of their biggest wins, Simon, it's when they explode from outside. They're double-digit threes. It's when they're really knocking down shots, and there's probably a couple that ring a few bells for you. How do you take that away from them?
Yeah, look, again, you got to almost choose your way of losing sometimes as well. Like they're so dynamic off the dribble and getting into the paint and scoring in that manner that you have to try and clog the paint. But if you're doing that, then they're going to see daylight on the weak side and find shooters. You've got to chance your arm against some of the guys on the Sydney Kings, the Justin Simons of the world, where you say, okay, there's going to be nights where he knocks down that corner 3. But you're going to let him make 1 or 2 before you make any adjustments. So
sure.
New Zealand really like to pack that key weight, and I feel like that's their strength and that's what they do well. They're going to have to force Sydney to sort of beat them first and then sort of make the adjustment. But the one guy you can't let get a sniff is obviously DJ Vasiljevic. And we saw that, fortunately, against South East Melbourne this year, but also again last year in the finals against Tassie, where he basically took the series by the scruff of the neck in that game too. And playoff series are built like that. They're built for moments, and he's a guy who will go after the moment. He'll seek it. And to this point, in the first 3 games of the regular season, New Zealand have kept him pretty quiet and inefficient. So, but that's a key for them. He only needs a quarter to blow up a series.
Let's talk about the Breakers. Earlier in the season, Chase Buford said in one of the games that it was like playing against the All Blacks, the physicality. If you're Mody Maor and the way that New Zealand like to play, are you wearing that as a badge of honour heading into game 1?
I think you ignore it, to be honest. Sometimes there's a little bit of deflection that comes from up in Sydney, and having reviewed that game, I reckon Sydney got away with a fair bit of physicality, and I think the post-game press conference may have been just a don't focus on us, have a look at them. So, yeah, look, one of the things in the second game, a series particularly, that Sydney got really physical with the bigs of New Zealand, doubling a lot, and there's a lot of hands and a lot of reaching in and a lot of physicality down low. I think both teams can play that way and play in that manner. And that's the thing about Sydney, is that they're so diversified in their skill sets. They can pretty much play any sort of brand of basketball and still be successful at it. So yes, I'd really like to see New Zealand be physical in this series. But I feel like Sydney do have the personnel to overcome or participate really well in a heavy physicality series.
How important is Derek Pardon for New Zealand?
Yeah, really important for a multitude of reasons. One, an elite defender, but what he does better than anybody in the league is just free the ball up. He's an incredible screener. There's no official award to the best screener in the league, but if there
should be,
he'd have a trophy, no doubt about it. But look, he frees the ball up, and against the Sydney Kings drop defense, and the ability of your Barry Browns and the Will McDowell-Whites to score in that mid-range. And we saw in the last game, McDowell-White explode for a 20-point, 10-assist game. Like, he was highly effective in those pick and rolls. Having Pardon free up the ball like that, really important. He's a threat on the roll. But what I'd like to see from him is just greater presence on the offensive boards. Sydney have done a wonderful job of keeping him off the boards in their 3 games this year. And I feel like second shots in the playoffs are really important, and Sydney have got them, have backed them up a little bit during the course of the year with that.
Will McDowell-White, you mentioned him and his explosion that we saw a couple of weeks ago, but and the numbers don't lie. There have been some massive games and there have been some quieter games as well. If you're coaching New Zealand, how are you getting Will McDowell-White involved in the game in the first quarter?
Yeah, look, I think Mody does a great job of trying to get him lots of touches, and they play make through him. And with that drops defense, I really feel like that Will is ready to feast. And I feel like the way that they're structured defensively, Sydney, that Will can profit from that. Now, what's going to require in the last game, you hit 6 floaters, okay? And most of them, not defended or free, not contested, I should say. And, they're tough shots. He's gone 6 of 7 and got fouled on another. They're tough shots to make. And they're the ones where you see it's feast or famine sometimes with Will. If he's knocking that down, and Isaiah Le'afa's knocking that down, then New Zealand's going to be a real handful. Barry Brown's going to get his. But if those two can knock down that shot, then all of a sudden there may need to be adjustments. Now, Sydney have the ability to switch that. They can go small ball, and they've got plan Bs, I'm sure, in place. But I really feel like that Will McDowell-White's play is going to be heavily important for New Zealand's success.
One that we tend to maybe forget about a little bit in a series like this, Simon, is the benches, because we do focus on the stars so much. So we've got 2 games in 48 hours and then a break, and then potentially 2 games in 48 hours as well. How important are the bench players for both teams coming into this series?
Yeah, enormous. And they're probably the 2 deepest teams in the league this year, I think, on both sides of the ball. You obviously got the 6th man of the year coming off the bench with Barry Brown for New Zealand, but there's plenty of playmaking that comes off that bench. The one in particular that stands out for me is Rob Lowe. I just feel like that he can provide some issues for Sydney against the small ball team. And primarily that's because Brantley can go down to the post. They need to double that. And just that extra shooter on the perimeter can really provide problems for Sydney. We saw that in Game 3 in the second quarter when New Zealand sort of started to blow that lead out to double figures. He played a really important role in that. So I feel like New Zealand, incredible offense coming off that bench, but also they cover both sides of the ball. And Sydney, they just keep coming. They quick rotations. It doesn't really seem to matter who's on the floor. The thing about their bench is they come in and they like to end the quarters with those small lineups. They're really quick, and it seems to speed them up another gear. So an unbelievable battle of the benches between these 2 lineups.
Right, let's finish this off. This is a question without notice for you. What's the most important thing for both teams? Let's start with the Kings. For them to win the championship series, what is the most important thing?
The most important thing for the Kings, without notice, I'm going to say defensive rebounding. I just feel like if they can keep New Zealand to one and done possessions, that it's going to go a long way towards Sydney just being comfortable. I think that's the key for them. For New Zealand, it's probably their half-court offense and their ability to operate out of that pick and roll. Again, we talk about McDowell-White and Isaiah Le'afa. And their decision-making in that pick and roll. And I'll go a little further on that one, especially with Isaiah. He can be a little bit turnover-prone at times. He leads them in turnover percentage. He's been really disciplined against Sydney this year. But the thing about Sydney is that if you turn the ball over, because you know that they're going to be doubling down on the block and they'll get a few turnovers that way and get themselves running. But if the guards turn the ball over and it's going back the other way, Sydney going to run all over you. So I really feel like the play of Isaiah Le'afa being really solid with his decision-making for his minutes when he's out there, that's really key for New Zealand.
Can I be cheeky enough to ask you for a series prediction?
Yeah, hang on. Look, I'll probably go with the Kings. I just feel like that they can go into the trenches with New Zealand when it becomes really physical. They can win in that manner of basketball, and we've seen it this year. But if they manage to swing the series on their side and get that open court and create off block shots and transition off turnovers, then I just don't think New Zealand can go with them over a 5-game series. Having said that, I won't be surprised if New Zealand come in and win the series. They're a tremendous team. What Modi's done this year has been fabulous, and I kind of hope New Zealand get it.
I think there might be a few thinking the same sort of thing. Simon, thanks so much. It's been great to pick your brain, and we hope you enjoy the series. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Jack. Thanks for having me.